Hello and welcome to episode 162 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual spike. My name is Stanislav here in Chicago, and with me on the line from Denver, Colorado, it's the one and only Shane Beeps.
Stanislav, did I just see during this opener that you just turned around and reprimanded your cat?
That's right. I got my little spray bottle right here.
So just not even breaking stride. I had to do that this morning with my cat.
Look at the size of the gap that I had to shoot my cat through, and he was on the other side of that door.
So you have it more like a jet, not a mist.
Oh yeah, no, I'm going. I'm shooting to hit that boy.
We're gonna have some people be like, you can't spray water at your cats, but I'll tell you what, it's nonviolent. They just don't like the noise. But Stanislav, it's good to see you. I'm glad that we're able to come together every week and record the dive down with each other.
Indeed. I'm also happy that joining us all the way from a nice steak dinner, it's the Godfather, Dave Harbarger.
Oh. I didn't think I was going to make it, and then I made it. I ate the whole old 96er. I got the t-shirt, and then I rolled my way back west out of Chicago into the western suburbs to be able to be here with you all tonight, and I didn't even miss anything. I thought I would miss something, but here I am.
So, Dave, what did you get? What sides did you get?
I got the old 96er. That's it.
Did you on? Is that really a thing?
No, it's from the Great Outdoors. John Candy, everybody.
I mean, I don't think I've seen that movie.
What? Okay.
Yeah.
You know, the sides that you get at Bavette's, you get a wedge salad, you get a
Bavette's, get at us.
Bone-in strip. Yeah, Bavette's Bar and Boeuf sponsor our podcast. You get the Brussels sprouts, you get the corn, you get the mashed potatoes, you get the mac and cheese.
Man, their Brussels sprouts are so good.
They really are.
And you had room for a steak after that?
Yeah, alongside it.
Yeah, the side of steak.
Mm-hmm. I had a side of steak. That's what they're known for.
Fill up on bread rolls before your first bite of meat.
No, I did a good job with that.
That's amateur.
That's good.
Well, glad I can make it, everybody. Sorry if I make any gastrointestinal noises while we're all sitting here. It's my fault.
I think Dave is at his best when he's full of red meat. On this week's show, we're breaking down the weekend's Modern Showcase Challenge. A lot of strong competitors earned some QPs, and they put their skills to the test. And we're going to talk about who did well and what the metagame looked like. We're also going to continue exploring some of the latest cards from Neon Dynasty to appear in Historic, Modern, maybe Pioneer, in another edition of Sleeve, Believe, Heave. Don't stop sleeve heaving. And then finally, if time allows, Shane played in a ProQuest over the weekend with this new up-and-coming card game. It's called Flesh and Blood.
Are we really going to talk? Man, if we have time for that, I'll be amazed. But I will definitely talk about it.
If we have time for that, Shane will tell us all about this new card game. Flesh and... Is it Bone? Flesh and Bone in?
It is. It is Flesh and Blood.
That's that show on Netflix that has the weird steampunk trains and ghosts.
Like a weird Thomas the Tank Engine?
Shadow and Bone, I think it's called.
Thomas and Bone.
Before all that, though, let's housekeep ever so quickly. Shout out to the newest patron to join the Dive Down Nation, Zach B. Thank you so much. Zach actually sent us a little bit of a pronunciation guide for some of the new Kamigawa cards. So Zach will try to do you proud there.
Really?
Also, thank you to Seamless Loop for providing the latest iTunes review for the Dive Down.
The call to action worked. We got Seamless Loop.
5 more stars. Count
Add
them
them to the pile.
Just banking them like Mario over here. And if you'd like to support the Dive Down, you can find us at patreon.com/the Dive Down, where you can join for as little as $1 per episode to get access to our exclusive, definitively discreet Dive Down Discord server. Come and talk with everybody, all the members of the nation. We'd love to have you. Hop on in. There's other great stuff going on. When I joined the call earlier, Shane and Stan were talking logistics about sending out Patreon swag. It's coming up. Deck boxes are coming up. We got all kinds of stuff coming up here now that spring is sprung, and so has the Dive Down. Patreon.com/the Dive Down. It happens every spring. We spring every spring.
I mean, you gotta. If you don't, you're just going straight to summer, and that's not fun. We also are brought to you by manatraders.com. Use sign-up code TheDiveDown2022 for 15% off your first 2 months. I've noticed that they keep adding a few new cool features that I like, where it's just like slightly cleaner interface, different ways of like requesting cards. You can easily download the deck list that you want to use. Like, oh man, I need to like rent these cards, then I have to go back and like find the deck list. It's just a lot easier and seamless.
You've always been able to do that. I'd just like to say really quickly, it's just the button was kind of hidden. But
Yes, it's a better button, better layout.
On your renting screen, yeah, they queue you up. They're looking for your cards. You hit a button when the queue is ready to pick the bot when the bot is going to come look for you. So you can be ready when they come look for you instead of having that weird thing where they look for you automatically. And then also there's a button there to download what you just rented as a Magic Online deck list. It's very, very nice. I saw that upgrade too, Shane.
Awesome. So if you have been thinking about using Magic Online, but you're like, I don't really want to have to deal with buying cards there, having a second collection, you definitely want to use Mana Traders. It makes it very easy and reasonable to have access to basically every card in the universe. And if you want Boseiju, they have at least 4 with your name on them.
I'd heard that they did only have like 8 of this turtle card that's very big in Legacy now, but that's for another time maybe.
The one with a giant cannon on his shoulder?
Yep.
Yeah, it's like Kappa Blastoise.
Yeah.
It's because those cards are impossible to acquire. They're only available in chests.
Yeah.
So that means they have to be cracking chests and getting a whole bunch of nothing.
Always open your chests, everybody. Remember that.
What do you think Mana Traders does with the play points that you get from opening chests?
Oh, man.
They just burn them off, and they got some people who are ringers, I guess, using their account. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
Good question.
Good answer.
All right. So this week, as Stan mentioned, we're going to be taking a look at last weekend's Modern Showcase Challenge. This is Modern Showcase Challenge number 2, February 19th, 2022. Not sure if there was a number 1 or potentially a number 3. Didn't see any posts about that on Reddit. But as usual, there's an excellent breakdown on Reddit of this tournament, courtesy of the one, the only Bamzing, the unofficial 4th co-host of the Dive Down, who provides us with all of our real-time breakdowns of tournaments such as these. You can also find it on the Wizards of the Site Coast, of course. But I think there's a lot of interesting things in this one. So let's take a look at the top 32 breakdown from Bamzing for this Modern Showcase Challenge. What do you think, Stan and Shane?
What, the breakdown? You just want me to like look at this and just like immediately?
Are you excited to look at this?
Oh, always. No, so what's funny is you said Wizards of the Site Coast.
I did.
It was very good.
Oh, good. Well, I'm steak. I have steak tummy right now, so
I'm a steak man.
Distracting.
All your blood is in your tummy.
Exactly. All right. So
with the meat,
there were a number of decks in this top 32, but only some of them were in multiple. So let's take a look at that first. The number 1 deck played in the top 32 of this Showcase Challenge, and again, remember, a Showcase Challenge, as Stan alluded to earlier, is a tournament that you have to pay for with QPs, right, Stan? So it's not tickets, it's not play points. You have to get QPs in order to get into it. So this is good players in this tournament.
Right. So this is basically league grinders who are going 3-1 or better enough to generate 40 QPs that way, or people who've spiked a prelim. So if you get a 3-1 or a 4-0 in a prelim, it gets you... A 4-0 gets you all the way in. A single 4-0...
As you would know.
Yeah,
correct.
as you would know.
A single 4-0 gets you 40 PPs... or QPs, and then a 3-1, I think, gets you 20 or 30.
Nice.
But yeah.
All right. So at any rate, the number 1 deck that was brought by players to this tournament was 4 copies of 4-color Blink. And let's talk about who brought this. It was Bob the Dog, better known as Gabe Nassif, Canister, Jabberwocky, and Baron of Bacon, who I think is another well-known Magic Online grinder. All brought this deck, some of the most notable names in Magic Online. But here's the thing. These 4-color Blink decks, okay, you got Yorion, right? Like they're 80 card decks. Are we really in a world where we just run Ragavan and Omnath in the same deck and like that's cool with everybody? Because, gosh, I hate looking at this list. I don't like these decks. I don't like to play these decks. I don't like to play against them. This really is just good money cards deck.
Did you just say Ragavans are on these decks too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's largely just MH1 and MH2 cards.
Yeah. So if you haven't seen one of these decks recently, I'm looking at Gabe Nassif's list. It's 4 Teferi Time Raveler, 4 Renin 6, 2 Fury, 3 Icefang Coatl, 4 Omnath, 4 Ragavan, 4 Solitude, 4 Expressive Iteration, 4 Prismatic Ending, 4 Counterspell, 1 Lightning Bolt, 1 March of Otherworldly Light, 2 Memory Deluge, 3 Unholy Heat, 4 Abundant Growth, and 2 Spreading Seas. Gosh.
Oh, I see. So basically they're swapping Ragavan for the Eternal Witness combo.
Yeah, and none of these players are playing the Eternal Witness combo in this one, even though Jabberwocky's deck is a little bit bigger than everybody else's in that he is playing Teferi 5 over Ragavan. So no Eternal Witness combo and no Ragavan in Jabberwocky's list, but generally the same shell other than that.
That's interesting. I wonder if part of this is because Ragavan can help set up some faster kills potentially, or just like a more proactive gameplay early on. Because if you're leaning on Eternal Witness, Time Warp, Ephemerate, it just takes forever. And
yeah,
even though you might think the deck is really proactive with Solitudes and Omnaths, those cards get answered a lot in this mid-rangey format, and closing out games, even though you may be in a winning position, can still sometimes take forever.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's mana fixing for one thing, too, right? It's ramp, so it lets you get Omnath out earlier. It's just, this is not, it's sort of a control deck, but it's very much, like, it's almost like these are mid-rangey decks in some ways, like you said, and they're playing all of the best mid-range threats that are in the format, basically, and all the best interaction, the best counter spell, and it's just one deck that's got all those great things in it. But boy, even though I think I could field this deck if I wanted to, I don't really feel like this is on the menu for stuff that I would want to pick up and play. Personally, Stan, this seems like it could be close to your wheelhouse, though. How do you feel like you've never become quite a Blinks person ever?
Well, I played the Eternal Witness version for a few weeks, and it was really, really fun. I just kept losing to the clock. And my opponents they would be losing, but they would still end up winning because it just was impossible to actually deal 20 points of damage. So it is really fun, and maybe it's something that with a little bit of practice and paper you can get better at. Or maybe this new Ragavan technology is kind of the thing that helps you unlock a more faster plan because you're casting Omnaths a turn sooner, maybe casting Teferi on turn 2 even, and starting to lock opponents out with that. I don't know. But the deck is fun. I certainly do love it. I just love other decks too.
Yeah. Popular deck. All the best cards. Here it is. Also the most popular deck in this tournament in the top 32. Next on the list, no surprise given the way that things have been working lately, is 3 Grixis Shadow lists. There's actually 4 Shadow lists in this. One of the decks is marked as Blue-Black Control, and it is not Blue-Black Control. It is a shadow deck that is just Dimir. We'll talk about that in a minute because the Grixis Shadow decks are actually very stock for what you'd expect at this point in time. They're pretty much exactly the cards that you would expect for that. The blue-black deck is pretty interesting, though, in the sense that it has a creature suite that is 4 Death Shadow, 3 Snapcaster Mage, 2 Turok Dread Cantor, and then a heavy counterspell suite. It's got Archmage's Charm and Counterspell and Drown in the Lock, and then Consider, Fatal Push, Memory Deluge, and Mishra's Bauble is kind of most of the deck, the way that it's working right now. A couple other cards in there as well, but I actually seen this deck, I believe, so this deck by 3-0, THREE0, came in 13th place in this showcase. I believe that another version of this deck also top-8'd the Sunday Challenge yesterday that we are not talking about in depth, but it's interesting to see Snapcaster Mage back on the scene, right?
Yeah, I mean, in this
it's
one
just
deck,
a high-value card. I mean, whenever it shows up in Murktide, I'm never surprised. I'm actually just more surprised at kind of like how far Snappy has fallen when it does have still so much synergy with what's going on in the decks.
Yeah, with only 9 creatures here, this feels like a control deck with Death Shadows kind of just like your finisher.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it looks less tempo than Grixis does generally. I mean, it's like no tempo. This is like a counterspell and removal deck, basically.
3 Mishra's Bauble is so funny to me.
Yeah. You couldn't fit the 4th one in?
Yeah, just play 61 cards, 3-0.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I think that this is all about, of course, just making Lurrus something, and that's what this is. It's like a control Lurrus shell.
Yeah, it took this deck to make Lurrus into something. I agree, Dave.
I had a feeling that card would see play eventually.
Yeah, you called it out in the spoiler episode, I think, actually.
I did. Cat types are always good.
Yeah.
You thought it was be like a cat tribal recursion piece, but we saw something more.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people were planning on bringing back a Johnny's Pride Mates with it. Next on the list, with 3 copies as well in the top 32, Amulet Titan. This is very much what you would expect. The only thing that I thought was worth mentioning is that the 3 Amulet Titan players all had between 1 and 2 Boseiju main and 3 total in the 75. So it was either 1 main, 2 in the side, or 2 in the main, 1 side. Everybody's playing it, though. Other than that, it's Amulet Titan. What do you expect?
And kind of like a mild return to Cultivator Colossus, which I feel like has had its ups and downs, and both of these decks are playing, I mean, let's see, 2 copies, 2 copies, 3 copies.
Yeah, notice that all of these decks are also Turntimber Symbiosis decks, which was not always stock. And I think you're playing that with your Colossus in particular, since you don't really want Turntimber and a Karn deck, since you want that Symbiosis to find some real value.
Shane, it's a card that you always said was terrible. Here it is.
That's not true. I said it was terrible in Historic, because it was terrible in Historic.
But you like it all right in Amulet and Modern.
I mean, do I like anything in Amulet?
No. You love everything in Amulet.
You love
and that's
Explore.
The truth.
I love Arboreal Grazier.
Grazier.
It's my favorite Seattle-based Cheers spinoff.
I hear the Blues are calling. All right, number 3 on the list of prevalence is Blue-White Hammer. So Hammer is now a Blue-White deck. Surprise. I mean, we've talked about it the last couple of weeks, but it feels like maybe it's permanently there right now. Both of the people who made it in the top 32 with Blue-White Hammer were in the top 8, and the tournament was won by a Blue-White Hammer deck piloted by Jesse Samick. Basically, it's blue for Reality Chip, and then maybe some number of Spell Pierces, mostly in the sideboard. Yeah. Occasionally one in the main, I think, has happened. And then Lavinia. The 8th place deck also had Meddling Mage in the sideboard as well in your Hammer deck. Pretty interesting stuff.
The first place Jesse Samick deck playing a 1 of Restoration Specialist as well. Yeah. Really interesting card. 1 and a white for a 2/1 Dwarf Artificer. It has white, sack specialist, return up to 1 target artifact and up to 1 target enchantment from your graveyard to your hand. You play this. I mean, if they have a way to answer Sigarda's Age, sure, you can get that back. But really, this just lets you replay all of your Urza sagas.
That's right. Stan, you've played this blue-white deck a good amount.
Yeah.
Did you like
just
it?
Last week.
Yeah. What do you think about it now?
I guess I like it as much as any other Hammer deck.
I'm really surprised at how quickly everyone's just saying, yeah, this is the right way to build this deck. And maybe it'll slowly change back into something else, but just, hey, we are Azorius now. This is what we're doing. We're doing Reality Chip. We're doing Lavinia. We don't need black spells. We don't need Fatal Push. We don't need Thoughtseize. This is good enough.
Also, Lion Sash has made its way to the board at this point from the main deck, it looks like.
I mean, Lavinia is just so good against Fury. You know what I mean? Fury being one of the absolute best cards against Hammer, that I think having both access to Lavinia, which is just a counter against one of the silver bullets against you, but also access to Reality Chip just lets you grind on game 1 as part of your proactive plan without having to take a turn off to fetch Lurrus and then hope that you have like additional mana to cast stuff off of Lurrus. I just think Reality Chip is like your main deck Lurrus that you can fetch up with Stoneforge if your games are going long.
And it puts additional pressure on artifact removal, where it's like, I don't just have to worry about something like Colossus Hammer or maybe like a Shadow Spear or something like that. I also have to worry about the built-in card advantage engine of Reality Chip.
Mm-hmm.
So, and even though people do run quite a bit of anti-artifact cards, primarily because of the popularity of something like Hammer, you do run out of those eventually. And something like the Reality Chip, like you said, Stan, you plant that late game and just get back into the game super quickly.
Next up on the list, Living End. 2 Living End decks, and both of these decks also made the top 8. Well-known Magic Online player Winged Hussar came in second in this event with Living End. And the list looked pretty normal stock, except for adding 2 Colossal Sky
Turtle.
There it is.
I saw that, Dave. I was like, oh, Dave called it.
Yeah, and you know what? That was only in the second place list, which is probably the difference maker. I'm sure if they were both playing Colossus Sky Turtle, you'd see a Living End Mirror in the finals.
I think they both would have come in second place at least.
At least, yeah.
I will say, I've seen some people on Twitter talking back and forth about Sky Turtle in the main. Some people saying that they've blown people out with it. Some people saying that they really wish they had Brazen Borrower instead. I think it's a cool new toy for people to play around with. The other thing, of course, that I've noticed with this is that this deck has really picked up a number of copies of Odawara Soaring City, which is the blue channel land from Kamigawa. Seems like a good place to have this. It makes up some of the stuff that maybe you would have had been able to do with Brazen Borrower with a land instead. And so maybe you're getting to cover some of your Brazen Borrower stuff with that you're giving up to Colossal Sky Turtle by having this land instead. But it's nice to, I imagine it's nice for this deck to have some new tools and ways to interact. And that green channel ability on Sky Turtle, I bet, comes in handy occasionally when you need to cascade again, unexpectedly.
Yeah, I think the other important tech on Odawara is that it bounces planeswalkers. So you can do this on opponent's end step if they have Teferi Time Reveler, which you are not able to do with Brazen Borrower.
True. Great point.
So it's a better way to manage your mana, I think, early in the game.
And then finally, the last decks that were a double in this top 32 is Blue-Red Murktide, completely stock lists as far as those go by my eye. So before we get into the one-ofs, which there was a bunch of interesting one-ofs in this, just wanted to go over the top breakdown, or the top 8 breakdown for the record. So it was 2 Hammer, both blue-white, as we said, 2 Living End, as we mentioned, 2 Grixis Shadow decks, a Amulet Titan deck, and a Jund food list. I don't think there's a lot more worth covering here other than the fact that Jesse Samick won, as we said, and Soulstrong, who has been killing it with Grixis Shadow lately, made the top 8 and went perfect in the Swiss with a 9-0, which is pretty interesting.
Wow, 9-0 in this killer lineup.
I know, right?
This Jund food deck, it's practically a historic deck, except it just has 4 Mishra's Bauble.
Absolutely.
Cool Decks Inc.
Yeah, so Cool Decks Inc. Some of the best one-off lists here, and Jund Food was the best one. Now, Jund Food was piloted the top 8 by Kogamo, and I think this is the most interesting list from the top 8. Like Stan said, it is a historic list with Cat Combo, and it has Ren and 6, but it also has Ravenous Squirrel in it, which I think is popping up maybe in historic, like you said. Urza's Saga, which searches up, of course, Witch's Oven, which is a nice way to add some consistency to your deck if you want. And then it has Trail of Crumbs as one of the payoffs in it, which kind of, has gone in and out of these Jund Food decks. But there's nothing going on here with Underworld Cookbook or as more, that fun person that we used to have a lot.
Where's Mayhem Devil? It's not even Mayhem Devil in
no
this.
Mayhem Devil in this. This is just grinding, this deck, I think.
And it's a Luris deck. So
yeah.
You can't play Mayhem and Luris, and I think that's kind of what you're going for.
Yeah.
Why, though? Why can't I just have Mayhem Devil and win faster? I don't know. It's a grind deck. You're right.
Because you're winning with more inevitability, I think, with this list. Although I do think it's worth noting that this list has also snuck 4 Ragavan in there because, of course, it's a deck with a bunch of 1-drops in it with creatures, and so we got to have Ragavan as well. If we're going to have Ren and 6, bring Ragavan along for the ride, too. But we haven't seen Cat Combo come up in Modern too often, so it's kind of cool to see it make an appearance at this point. What do you think? Would you try Cat Combo here in Modern? You excited to give it a go? Do you guys like Oven Combo?
Dave, that's a ridiculous question.
Yeah. No.
It seems like a real trigger-heavy deck. Do you know what I mean? And like you said, I think you just have to really like getting people in this fashion, and I can definitely see why one might. It's just like, it's weird, like when you look at it, you're like, okay, it's a bunch of lands, it's a bunch of play sets of creatures, and I guess you just kind of do the thing over and over and over again.
I think worth pointing out that the pilot of this Cat Combo deck, Kogamo, is a MTGO killer across formats dating back to 2011, which makes me think that this could be some amount of pilot skill as well, getting them into the top 8.
That would be weird and unlike Magic.
Right, to reward skill. I mean, I will say, this is a deck full of 1-drops and undercosted cards, which does have some hallmarks of powerful cards in Modern, right? It's just a question of whether this core, this core has never really felt like it was powerful enough for Modern. It's always felt more historic level, right?
Yeah, I guess the interesting thing here is you can play bad creatures right now because everything is within Unholy Heat range. So maybe you can do these just cheap, synergistic, grindy plans because Luris is going to buy back your creatures eventually if someone is going to, try to Unholy Heat you. it really hurts to try to Unholy Heat or remove Cauldron Familiar in any way, because once they get a Gilded Goose or a Trail of Crumbs down, they're just going to get that cat back. Ravenous Squirrel, I played this card in the historic version of this deck, and like Ravenous Squirrels just get huge and can even be a card advantage engine of their own. So
I mean,
maybe
just hope that you dodge removal, like in Exile.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you really just need to dodge Solitude and Prismatic Ending. And what I feel like only one deck is playing those two cards these days.
Well, and March of Otherworldly Light occasionally too now.
What did they just wait to hold the removal for like Luris? Like you can't do a ton with these necessarily. Like if you just keep up one piece of removal for Luris, how do you crawl back from that? I don't know.
We'll see. I don't know if we'll see it again, but it was interesting to see this core.
Here's how you do it. You do it with Ren and 6 and Urza Saga, making giant Karnstructs.
Oh yes, I forgot that Urza Saga is just in these decks now.
It's also a threat.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I'm on board with this deck now. All you had to say
is Urza Saga. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see if this one pops up again. Let's take a look at the 9th place list. This is a red-white, basically ephemerate deck piloted by Rianne in 9th place. And it is, it's Fury, Solitude, Obsidian Charmaw, Ranger Captain of Eos, Seasoned Pyromancer, Ragavan, and Esper Sentinel, along with main deck Blood Moon, Prismatic Ending, and Ephemerate, couple Lightning Bolts. This was
Big
kind of
Boros.
a weird deck to see. What's that? Big Boros. Yeah, exactly. Boros mid-range instead of
chunky Boros.
Yeah, chunky Boros. It's even got a dragon. It was interesting to see a take on this kind of mana base that wasn't prowess based, right? Like this is bigger, uses Ephemerate, uses elementals as part of it. Pretty interesting. Almost got there, right? 9th place.
This is an Obosh deck.
Yes, and it's Obosh. That's the other thing that's hard to realize when you look at it, is that it snuck Obosh in there as the companion.
Interesting. And it even has this very light touch of black with one Blood Crypt and one Savai Triome to play a couple Kaya Orzhov Usurper out of the sideboard.
And actually, the most interesting card to me here is in the sideboard, there are 2 Durgar Hedgemage from Lorwyn, I'm assuming, which says, when this card enters the battlefield, if you control 2 or more mountains, you may destroy target artifact. When this card, and then it has another ability that says, when this card enters the battlefield, if you control 2 or more planes, you may destroy target enchantment. It's sort of like a Wear Tear on a 2/2 that costs 2 generic and a red-white hybrid. Guess goes good with Ephemerate.
Yeah, so blowing up an Urza Saga and a Colossal Hammer in one go.
And then doing it again.
Over and over.
Pretty interesting stuff. Another red-white deck, 18th place by NTG Booleant, is a non-hammer Stoneforge Mystic deck. But the spicy thing here is that, with the core, kind of like in the last deck that we talked about with Ranger Captain, Fury, Solitude, Ragavan, and Sentinel, this deck has a 4 of Fervent Champion and a 4 of Magus of the Moon in the main.
Yeah, this has been a deck that Spike's been doing pretty well with for the past few weeks. I don't remember the Magus in Spike's list, but yeah, it's basically just a Boros Blade deck that he's been killing with. I like it a lot.
And you get to equip things for free to Fervent Champion is basically the idea. So go get a Sword of Fire and Ice and equip it up, essentially, because that's where you get the biggest discount.
Yeah, imagine a winning deck in TYOOL 2022 with 3 Sword of Fire and Ices.
Always my favorite sword, to be honest. It's also got a Shokin Zan Crucible of Defiance in the side, which is interesting to see. Finally, there's even one more red-white brew in the top 32 that came in 32nd place. It's a red-white Boom Bust deck, and not that Boom Bust deck, not a Crack the Earth deck. It is a full Nahiri into Emrakul list where you're searching up Nahiri and sneak attacking with Emrakul.
Didn't you play the GP like in 2018 with that list, Dave?
I think it was 2016. But yes, it was pretty early and it was not great. You were playing Infect. I was playing Jeskai Nahiri. So interesting to see all these like weird red-white builds. This one is kind of got some prison elements. It's got Chalice. It's got Karn the Great Creator as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Red-white, having a moment.
I know. Really weird, right? And then that Crack the Earth deck is also red-white, and that didn't show up here, but that's been making the rounds on Magic Online as well.
This may have already existed in Boom Bust decks, and I just hadn't noticed, but it's running the combo of, in addition to Cleansing Wildfire plus Flagstones, it has Cleansing Wildfire plus Cascading Cataracts, which is an indestructible land that if you target with your cleansing, you get a land and a card without putting yourself down on mana.
Also, Boom Bust is a combo with both those things as well. So this is all about land destruction.
Cool tournament. I'm going to play in the next one. I have the points. I just was tied up with Legacy on Saturday. I really should have played this instead.
Well, but you were in Legacy. All right, well, that is the results. Stan, you said that you were going to play in the next one of these. What deck do you think you're going to play at this point? Even looking at these results, or just what are you liking? What are you liking in Modern right now?
So if there was one this weekend that I was going to play, I'd probably play Izzet Murktide with main deck Fury. That's kind of the deck I'm jiving most with. And if I have a little bit of time, like let's say I'm going to play in the one that happens in March or April, then maybe it's the deck I talk about during the dive down. Who knows?
No. All right. Well, that's a good tease. Stay with us as we talk about another week of Sleeve, Believe, Heave of Neon Dynasty.
So, Stanislav, I saw something new in the dive down compound bathroom.
Oh yeah, did you see my brand new safety razor?
Oh yeah, that's the way to do it, my friend. How are you enjoying this?
So it was my birthday over the weekend, and my wife, knowing that I have all this sweet, awesome new wet shaving products, upgraded my razor blade. Because up until now, I have been polluting the earth with actual disposable razors.
Oh man.
Yeah, I know. It's not great. But it's like all I ever really did was shave like a little bit of my upper cheek, a little bit of my neck beneath my chin, just to kind of line up my beard. So I
said like a yellow Bic razor.
Basically, yeah, like 3 dull blades. I never felt like investing, in those expensive cartridges that you have to put on like your Bic or Gillette, right?
Yeah. But it's a nice match with the Barrister and Man products. That
100%. Yeah, because I had the brush, I had the shaving soap, and now I get to actually shave myself in a more sustainable way as well, because the razor itself lasts forever, and then the razor blades, super, super cheap, and they're recyclable.
Dope. Very cool.
So that all happened, and I gotta say, I just had the best shave of my life now. Like,
awesome.
I don't know if you can see how clean these cheeks are.
They look clean even on webcam.
Yeah, even on webcam looks good.
Since Saturday. It's Monday night.
So Stanislav, you also got some new stuff from Will over at Barrister and Man, right?
Heck yeah. So I got some new shaving supplies that I haven't had a chance to use yet because I got them on a Sunday night, and who shaves on a Sunday night? Just like British
Me when
gentlemen.
I'm amped to get new products from Barrister and Man.
Yeah.
I generally, when I'm shaving, I have to shave Sunday morning and Sunday night, then Monday morning and Monday night.
Right. But not me. I did also, however, get very generously from them is some hand soaps and some body soaps, which I did get a chance to try.
Yeah.
I got the Cootie Killer Lavender hand soap.
Yeah.
Excellent.
You like the lavender?
I am a huge fan of lavender scented products. That is kind of my most charming trivia fact.
I agree. What else did you get?
I also got lavender body soap, and they threw in some Castile, a bar of Castile soap.
Yeah.
Huge. For those of you who aren't familiar with Castile soap, it's not made with any animal fat or product like a lot of other soaps are, and it's unscented. So it's just this really great, very few ingredients. It feels natural, pretty much just smell like whatever fragrances you put on yourself after you bathe. Really, really nice stuff.
No, it's awesome. Yeah, I know we have some stuff coming this week. And one thing we don't focus enough on, I think, is the non-shaving, non-dude products. We know that there's a lot of lady listeners, a lot of non-binary listeners, people of all stripes, and you might not shave. So there's also other products at Barrister and Man you can check out. If you want to look at any of the shaving, any of the body products, head on over to Barrister and Man, M-A-N-N. The owner of the company, Will, is a citizen of the Dive Down Nation. We've been working with him to get the word out. Use code TheDiveDown2022 at checkout for 15% off your first order. And tell Will that we sent you. All right, we are back in the dive down. And hey, you know what? Last week, we went over the artifact cards that we completely whiffed on in the spoiler episodes. And it turns out there's more stuff to try out in Neon Dynasty than we even originally thought. You know, we didn't talk about Boseiju that much last week, of course, but there's a lot more going on than that. There's all sorts of cool cards, cool synergies, cool things that people are doing out there. And we decided to test a few more decks this week in another edition of Sleeve, Believe, Heave Neon Dynasty Part 2. So, Stan, I thought that we'd have you go first because this is, I think, one of the coolest decks we have to talk about this week.
I'll be happy to go first. I did play 2 decks in Modern for this segment. Before I get into them, though, I want to go off script very, very, very briefly and tell you guys that I wasted a lot of time this last week playing Neon Dynasty Limited.
People are saying it's incredible.
If you are a limited dabbler like myself who just tries a set every once in a while, but you haven't had a chance to try Neon Dynasty yet, do yourself the favor. Use those draft tokens that have been racking up on your arena account or maybe some excess PPs you have in your MTGO account. This set is incredible. Just, I can't stop drafting it. I did one this morning just for the heck of it. It's so fun.
Wow, I will give that a try. As you know, I used to be only a limited player.
Man, that's so wild to remember.
Yeah.
I'm basically talking to you, man.
Yeah, I will get back in there. I haven't tried anything in probably a year and a half or so. So
I do have 4 draft tokens from when I was still purchasing like the fancy track on the rewards.
Mm-hmm.
So Stan, you didn't play limited this week. You did play constructed, right?
Well, Shane, you know what? I'm a man of many talents. I did both. But we're going to talk about some of the constructed decks I played. I wrote notes for one of them because only one of them really deserved any notes. And that is a deck that appeared in last week's Modern Challenge, 4th place, piloted by a MTGO player named Scipios, and it's a Teamer Slogurk Assault Loam mid-range lands deck. We mentioned it really briefly in the breakdown that we did.
Oh, you mean Slogurk the Overslime, right? Not the other Slogurks?
the Underslime, Fast Gurk, the Overslime.
Ooze Tribal.
Or the Underslime. I didn't stick
Yes.
the landing there. Oh, well.
You know what? A for effort. Yeah, so I'm talking about Teamer Slogurk, the Overslime deck. I'm going to break this deck down in a little bit more detail than we touched on last week because it has 2 main components that I think are important to identify individually. Component 1 is the lands package, and the component 2 is just mid-range good stuff. Let's focus on the lands package because it's really the most unique element about this deck. Primarily designed all around this card called Slogurk, the Overslime from, I think it's Midnight Hunt.
Yeah, I think it's Midnight Hunt.
Yeah, Innistrad, Midnight Hunt, also in double feature. I'm just going to say all of these cards right now, I'm just going to say from double feature because it's technically not wrong.
That's fine.
Slogurk the Overslime, 1 green blue for a legendary creature ooze, 3/3 trample. Whenever a land card is put into your graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 counter on Slogurk, remove 3 +1/+1 counters from Slogurk, return it to its owner's hand. You can only do this from the battlefield. And then when Slogurk leaves the battlefield, return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. So it basically has a loam effect stapled onto it, like from the loam. So Slogurk, 3 copies in the deck, kind of the main payoff of this whole section of the deck that also includes 4 copies of Wrenn and 6, 10 fetch lands, 2 Forgotten Caves, 2 Boseiju, 2 Life from the Loam, and 3 Seismic Assault. Okay? So far, so good?
Perfect.
The second half of the deck, that's the mid-range good stuff. It's kind of just some of the best cards in the format. Ragavan, DRC, Tarmogoyf, Expressive Iteration, Mishra's Bauble, Bolt, and Unholy Heat. You know what these cards do. I don't think we need to go over them in detail.
Stan, how do I cast Expressive Iteration?
I generally wait until turn 3 at least, but this is the type of card that keeps getting better the longer you wait in the game. Because you don't need to play lands off it. You can just double spell.
What?
Believe it. So the most interesting card here is, in fact, Slogurk. I think it's kind of going to be the namesake of this deck if it sticks around. Maybe, maybe not. What do I know?
It's so catchy.
What do I know about nomenclature? I want to talk about playing with this card in particular because it has a lot of text on it, right? Even though this card costs 3, pretty much play it as a 4-drop. Since one of the best and easiest things you can do with it is run it out while holding up a fetch land, and then as soon as it's on the battlefield, crack a fetch land to give it an extra counter.
So it's like Omnath.
It's like Omnath, it's like Seasoned Pyromancer. It's a host of many cards with a fake mana cost. You can also potentially ramp into it sooner if you did have a turn 1 Ragavan that connected once or twice. But in general, I found that Slogurk did the most work when I could immediately back it up with a land. Because then it gets out of Lightning Bolt range. Mm-hmm. Unless they have a Lightning Bolt to cast in response to you cracking a fetch land. But, maybe opponent tapped out. We'll count on that.
Sure, Stan always plays against bad people, so it's fine.
That's right. Likewise, you can also play it the turn after you cast a Seismic Assault. So if Seismic Assault is on the board, you can just hold up a land in your hand and grow Slogurk while shocking your opponent, or their permanents for that matter.
Or you hold it up for when they try to Lightning Bolt it, and then you shock.
Wow, Dave.
Now we're talking.
Let me write this down. That's good strategy. I think what made this card and really the whole deck very impressive to me is that pretty much all of the cards are good on their own, for the most part, but also get exponentially stronger when they're combined and synergized with all the other things that this deck is doing. Because all that Slogurk in and of itself asks you to do is to have fetch lands in your deck, which you're already doing in Modern most of the time. And then everything else, including Life of the Loam, certainly Renin 6, or even Forgotten Cave, and in some cases Seismic Assault, is just kind of additional gravy that you get to play with the Slogurk that makes your Slogurk a little better and makes your whole deck more synergistic so that you're not necessarily fighting on just a single axis, but have things that you can do pretty much every turn with your mana. Some of the coolest examples that I've found of, synergizing Slogurk with these other cards is that when Slogurk and Assault are on the board at the same time, every land that you pitch to your Seismic Assault is kind of like a Lightning Bolt because it puts an extra counter on your Slogurk, which has Trample, so you're connecting for an additional point of damage in addition to the shock that you're hitting your opponent with using that Seismic Assault trigger.
Hey, Stanislav, I hate to interrupt here. Have we explained what Seismic Assault is? I don't think it's such a staple card that everyone even knows what Seismic Assault does.
Sure, why not?
If people were playing in Tempest or whenever that card came out.
So it's triple red enchantment. You can discard a land card, and Seismic Assault itself deals 2 damage to any target. That's it.
Correct, yeah.
I for real loved this card when I was a teenager. Like, this card was so sweet to try to play. I know people have tried many, many times in Modern over the years to make it work, but it's a very cool card and a big piece of like a certain era of Magic history. It's from Exodus originally.
When was it reprinted into Modern?
It is in 10th edition. It is also in 8th edition as well.
Gotcha. Recently reprinted again in Ultimate Masters.
Yeah.
A few years ago.
Yeah, but this used to be in decks with Swans of Bryn Argol or something like that was another kind of creature payoff that let you recycle lands as part of how they worked. So that was sort of like a fringy deck that comes in and out of Modern here and there.
Yeah, and like we've seen other versions of red-green Assault Loam decks. There used to be a person at my LGS in Chicago who I used to play against that ran this deck when people played in person more frequently and before I had a child. I never really played with it myself, and I was really excited to do that here and kind of became a fan of it right out the gate. Moving on, though, Slogurk plus Renin 6, another little synergy we have here. It turns all of your fetches into lava darts for the same reason, because if you're cracking a fetch land, getting it back with your Renin 6, putting an extra point of damage onto, in the form of a 1/1 counter on Slogurk with Trample. Same is true of cycling Forgotten Caves or Fiery Islets, or even Boseijus, which this runs a couple of. And then you're card neutral with the Renin 6 because you're just getting those lands back, making your Forgotten Caves and Fiery Islets in particularly excellent because they can serve as card advantage on their own. Even Slogurk plus Dragon's Rage Channeler turns your surveilled lands into extra points of damage because Slogurk checks to see if a land is put into the graveyard from any zone. It doesn't have to be from your hand or from the battlefield. Eventually, I'd get myself into situations where I would have my opponent down to 10 or 8 life. And with an assault, Seismic Assault on the board, I would even just like combo kill my opponent without even having to swing by bouncing my Slogurk back to my hand by taking counters off of him, or using a Life of the Loam to get a couple land, or getting 3 lands back from my graveyard, because I'm filling my graveyard with lands over the course of this game. And then I just pitch them all to Seismic Assault if I'm holding an extra land that I just had from a previous turn that I didn't need to get off of the Slogurk. You just kind of surprise them sometimes without even having to, rely on trample or combat damage otherwise to do it.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the main thing for me here is this deck sounds really sweet. What do you think is helping it kind of pop up right now? Like, what do you think is is there something going on in the metagame that you think is making it a viable plan as opposed to something else? Or do you think somebody just found out something cool that's a different axis? What do you think about that part of it?
I think so much of the deck's strength is the mid-range half, which is not to say that the Slogurk and lands package aren't good. I think they are good. But what they basically enable you to do is have an alternative, game plan than you might get out of Murktide decks or Grixis Shadow decks. Because that's kind of like where I would position this deck in particular. With its Ragavan, with its Dragon Rages, Baubles, etc. In a lot of ways, it just looks like a typical Ragavan Expressive Iteration deck. It's just using Slogurk instead of Death Shadow or Murktide Regent.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the thing that you're trading. And then you also get to play Wrenn and 6 with that, which is just like, maybe the best Planeswalker in the format currently.
Yeah. Yeah, and Wrenn and 6 goes well with Seismic Assault, so suddenly you start getting this pull towards that. So, yeah, that's interesting. And it's an alternate win con that sometimes, if people can kill all your creatures, they're not good against Seismic Assault, so...
Yeah. I will admit, Assault is probably the weakest card in the deck, since, in some cases it can be a little hard to cast if you're fetching basics to maybe play around an opponent's Blood Moon. And it doesn't do much on its own, and it can even be a very bad top deck unless you're holding back lands.
It does literally nothing on its own.
That's right.
Yeah. The explosive kill potential is probably the most appealing draw, for the games where your opponent might think that they've stabilized. Maybe they got some blockers down and you don't happen to have a Slogurk and you're just counting on, Goyfs and expressive iterations to try to keep yourself in the game. Suddenly you play in a Seismic Assault, maybe you have some lands in hand, maybe you found one of your Life from the Loams, and then all of a sudden, like, you cleared the board or just done 6 or more damage to the opponent's face, and really they're on the back foot all of a sudden. If this deck lives on, though, I would not be surprised to see Assault replaced by something like Elvish Reclaimer as another cheap threat that keeps your engine going as well. And that's kind of like maybe an iteration that I want to experiment with myself, because it just felt like this was such another powerful version of the Ragavan Expressive Iteration deck that seems to take so many shapes and sizes in the format.
A Reclaimer in a deck without Urza's Saga? Come on.
Sue me. I want to talk about Boseiju because that's like the one new card in this deck. And I think it's sort of important to mention what Boseiju does here versus the other deck that I played. In this particular deck, I really liked it as an incentive to use Boseiju proactively to just pick off my opponent's non-basic lands, even if I knew that they had more to fetch. Or say, use it to target their lands even if they didn't have artifacts or enchantments that I was going to blow up with Boseiju anyway. Just because having a Wrenn and 6 out, cycling Boseiju every turn, basically lets you interact with the board in a certain way that eventually you might get them down to only basics, which can stifle their mana enough that they can't double spell because their lands only tap for one color, and maybe they're playing in a greedy deck on their own. I like that Boseiju in this deck got to be a part of a proactive strategy rather than just like a tool that I use to try to get my opponent if they happen to cast one of the permanent types, being artifact or enchantment, or just like waiting for them to play an Urza Saga if they don't even have it. So
right on.
As I may have hinted at earlier to maybe Dave's question about what I would play in a showcase challenge, I really like this deck. And
really? That much?
I really like this deck. And I think there's something here. And that's just because there's something to every Ragavan Expressive Iteration deck. And it's just kind of about figuring out what's the other thing you're doing when you're not playing your 1 and 2 drops. And I think Slogurk is this nice alternative value engine that can even play Blood Moons in the sideboard if it really wants to. I did bring him in a couple games, and it makes your mana a little more annoying because you have to cast some fetches. So you're probably, even though Assault Loam is triple red, like you're maybe taking out your Assault Loams because you need to find a blue in an island in a forest. But I just thought there was something here. And I think this is the type of deck that by playing Goyf in addition to your Ragavans, and while also having Ren and 6 to just generate all the value that provides, maybe it's not such a bad idea to like explore the potential of Slogurk when, as I mentioned, most modern decks these days are playing fetch lands, and fetches are kind of like all you really need to make Slogurk good. Throw in a couple left of the loam just to seal the deal, and you're off to the races. So I'll give this a spicy sleeve if you want to be on the cutting edge of teamer mid-range decks.
Of Slogurk tech.
Wow.
Yeah. Keep an eye on this one, folks. The last time I felt this way about a greenish deck was the late winter, spring of 2020, when we were all stuck at home.
And you bought Tron?
No. It was when I got into Ponza.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Like, all of a sudden, Ponza's good. So I think this is like itching those Ponza scratches without being an actual land destruction deck, which is the second thing that I did try. Teamer Liquimetal Ponza. I didn't even write notes for this deck because I don't want to belabor the point too long. I really hated it, and I thought all the cards were bad.
Wow.
So this particular deck, I saw it in
I hated it, and all the cards were bad, including known to modern bad cards: Ren and 6, Fury, Seasoned Pyromancer, Lightning Bolt.
Yeah, pretty much. So this is a deck that I saw appear in a league, and it's running 7 liquid metal effects, 4 liquid metal torque, and 3 liquid metal coating in the main, in addition to 1 more liquid metal coating in the side that you can fetch up with a Karn. Here's the problem with this deck, unlike the previous one. Unless you're drawing like coating and something else, those 7 cards, don't do anything. And there were just so many positions where I just felt like I'm staring at a hand of cards that can't really interact, that don't accrue any real value, a thieving skydiver that can't actually like steal artifacts from my opponent's board. And it just felt like it wasn't playing on the same axis as some of the best cards and decks in Modern are these days, where I mentioned in the previous deck, all the cards are good because they all kind of just do things on their own, with the exception of Seismic Assault that needs lands in hand to do the thing. And that deck is designed to keep your hand full of lands, right? This one, like, if you just draw a bunch of liquid metal coatings and a Seasoned Pyromancer or a Fury, like, you're not really doing that much. And sometimes you're not even getting to the 5 mana to make that Fury count. You're putting yourself at a card disadvantage, and then you have these like really stupid artifacts and no Karn to make them worth it. It does run 4 Boseiju, and I was thinking perhaps like Boseiju plus liquid metal coating would be enough of an engine or combo to make that deck tick. But you're not taking them down on lands either, because when you Boseiju someone, they have to fetch a land. So you're just doing that over and over until hopefully they run out of lands.
Hopefully they run out, yeah.
But that takes forever. So I would say this is like the type of deck where if you want to have some fun at the LGS, maybe you can take people by surprise. I didn't think this one really ticked because it really demanded a lot of things to go right for you, as opposed to the Slogurk deck where you can just like play turn 1 Ragavan, turn 2 Tarmogoyf, and everything else is kind of like your spicy tech if they happen to have early interaction.
Yeah.
This is like, I need to make sure I draw all of my best cards in the correct order and I don't see any interaction from my opponent, and then maybe I can like start eking out a little bit of value very gradually. So this one's a Heave for me, the liquid metal Ponza deck.
Heave it, baby.
Heave it. Who needs it? Not I.
There's enough decks out there.
At least, 20?
I mean, I haven't counted recently, but probably at least.
Shane, tell me, what have you been playing?
Man, so I went back to... I haven't played Modern in a minute, if you haven't been paying attention to my past weeks. But what I did this week is I was like, I just need to play some Boseiju. I need to see what Boseiju feels like. I need to get a bead on this powerful card that people were almost afraid of. So what I did is I went through the most recent 5.0 dump, and I found a list that intrigued me for a variety of reasons. 1, the 5.0 pilot was Mickey Plays Magic, who is also a citizen of the nation, Mickey S., He 5-0'd with his deck. It also was in the PTQ the week before, and he had slightly modified it to try to improve it. I think pretty much took out Oath of Nissa for Collected Company. And it's also an 80 card or a 95 card Yorion deck with a Death and Taxes, Selesnya deck, with some classics like Noble Hierarch, Thalia, Flicker Wisp, Stoneforge Mystic, Leonin Arbiter, and some newer cards like Esper Sentinel, slightly new Giver of Runes, Archon of Emeria, Skyclave Apparition, and of course Solitude. And the goal of this deck is like any Taxes deck, which is disrupting the opponent's mana, taxing their spells, making their lands come into play tap, making them unable to cast multiple spells in a turn, exiling some problematic permanents in Stan's lingo, or generally annoying your opponent while hopefully advancing your own game plan, or just able to build up mana to cast your slightly more expensive spells like Solitude or something like that. And that aggression comes in a little bit through chipping airstrikes with cards like Flicker Wisp or Archon. A few Noble Hierarch Exalted triggers can make your creatures into effective attackers in the ground as well. And the game sort of progresses. You get advantage with Flicker Wisp interactions on cards like Skyclave Apparition or your Stoneforge Mystic or, of course, your Solitude later in the game. And Stoneforge is, of course, tutoring up needed equipment like the now sort of classic duo of Batterskull and Cauldron Complete, and some additional new tech like Lion Sash to embiggen a flyer, clear an opponent's graveyard, maybe do both, and Aether Vials there, of course, to accelerate your development. Collected Company allows for mana and card advantage. And of course, this is a Yorion deck, so you do get some additional flicker benefits along with that beefy late game flyer. And as I was getting at, the reason I played this deck, or at least selected this deck, is that it features 4 Boseiju who endures, and if you somehow forgot what it does, it blows up an artifact, an enchantment, or a non-basic land for the channel cost of 1 in a green.
Question for you, Shane. Is this your first time playing a Taxes deck since we did the Modern Mono White deck dive in November of 2020?
That's a really good question. When's the last time I actually tried to do some kind of taxation? It might be.
Yeah, basically, when was the last time you put a Leonin Arbiter in your deck?
Oh my god, Leonin Arbiter, yeah. I mean, I hope that my Taxes deck didn't even have Leonin Arbiter because it's such a bad card, but that's maybe getting ahead of things. But yeah, not for a minute.
How dare you? I have a 5-0 with Leonin Arbiter.
Do you really? Is that like that weird Eldrazi Taxes deck? Did that have Leonin Arbiter? Oh my gosh.
For sure.
So on that subject of Leonin Arbiter, so what this deck is trying to do is make the balance of Boseiju, which your opponent is, of course, searching up a land with a basic land type for you removing the permanent of your choice. This deck can prevent the opponent from searching with Leonin Arbiter and with Aven Mind Sensor. So if, let's say you channel Boseiju with an Arbiter out, the opponent has to have 2 mana sitting around to pay for the pleasure of searching up a land, or the one of Aven Mind Sensor can be flashed in to force them to only search the top 4 cards of their deck. So, yeah, that's the gimmick, right? Is, hey, I am taking care of a permanent, but if you can't pay for this Leonin tax, or maybe I have the cheeky Aven Mind Sensor in there, then that puts us in my favor, where not only do I have a land that also can interact with your permanents, is that I can maybe make it so that it's even more in my favor. And so what's interesting about Boseiju, at least in my first experiences with it in this deck, is that it felt pretty fair, like on its own merits, right? Like in my matchups with things like Hammer, it felt like a pretty reactive card, almost like a removal spell, or I could take care of a lot of stuff, right? Like I could take care of Sigarda's Aid, I could take care of a flashed in artifact of some sort, I could take out an Urza Saga if I needed to. But even though this has a lot of flexibility against one of the best decks in the game that you think that Boseiju would be very powerful against, you only have 4 of them. And it does, and there's a lot of artifacts, and it does ramp your opponent. So trying to take away that sort of, not necessarily advantage, but take away that equalization factor of Boseiju seems really important. And that's what we see with this deck trying to do with something like Leonin Arbiter. We see that with other decks who are trying to do that with Renin 6 looping it, so that effectively you take away anything meaningful that they are trying to do, or maybe take them off of a color of land or something like that if they're trying to really stretch their mana base thin. And of course, with Boseiju, this deck is featuring 4 Ghost Quarters to additionally annoy opponents with maybe complex mana, and of course trying to get the Arbiter cheese as well. So on its own merits, this deck sounds like it's doing something potentially cool, but we do have to remember, I think, that this is, in fact, a Taxes deck. And therefore, the deck is not very good. I know it's amazing that I played a deck that I thought was bad in kind of a Sleeve Believe Heave episode, but I was talking to Mickey about this deck, and after his 5-0 and initial good experiences, I think he actually had a series of pretty good leagues. Like he was doing a couple 4-1s maybe in a 5-0. I could be wrong about that because Mickey is always doing random 4-1s. So all that being said, this is Death and Taxes, and Mickey was not super high on it after his initial good experiences as well. So the issue with this deck, to me at least, is that you're playing really underrate things compared to today's Modern that that have to come together really well in order to win. I think
wow, that sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Man, it's so weird. I think there's a lot of opportunities for this deck to do fun things and tricky things and be annoying to your opponent, but like it's not that fun because you're always feeling like you're fighting this uphill battle. Like when a hammer opponent has a couple 6/6 constructs attacking in on you because you took care of the first 2 Colossus hammers, and then they stuck the Urza Saga and things like that. Like, your Leonin Arbiter preventing that earlier search potentially, unless they pay 2, isn't really that fantastic. And so what I find with decks like these is like, it's a matter of like being able to apply, and the format altogether, right? It's like a matter of applying pressure to your opponent, having the tempo control of the game. And decks like these, I think, just can't really do either. Like, the way they try to control tempo is by interacting with their opponent's overall game flow, right? And then something like Stoneforge slipping in there can apply pressure with the right living weapons. But, like, there's a reason that Cauldra Complete is like a $5 card, right? Like, it's just not that amazing anymore in today's Modern. And the tempo of this deck is just almost always on the back foot because of the pace of what you're doing, the mana cost that you're paying for the cards, the rate of the cards versus what they're actually doing to the board state or to your opponent's game flow. And there's just so much efficiency in Modern these days that something like Thalia, that's something like a 3-mana Flicker Wisp, like something like even like a 3-mana Skycleave Apparition that for a brief period of time was a really great card. All of a sudden it's just like half a mana or 1 mana too slow compared to what else is going on. So that's kind of my overall thoughts on a deck like this is just like, hey, you're not on rate anymore if you ever were. And I'm almost surprised that it's a Yorion deck because I don't feel like it's flickering enough late game to be like, I want to run 80 of these cards, right? Where it's like, maybe I could trim this down a bit and I could ditch a few of these things. But when you look at the list, you're like, I do want all of these. I want Esper Sentinel. Maybe it's not necessary. I want Giver of Runes. Maybe I don't. And so it's just like, maybe you could trim here and there, or you could get your lands down to like 20 or 21 or something like that. And then you have a leaner version that is more consistently coming together and not just like, okay, I had the Thalia when they were on a spell-based deck, or I had the Archon when they were like storming off, like randomly playing Storm or something, or like a Cascade deck.
Yeah, I'm really believing everything you're saying, Shane. It always really puzzled me that Taxes would play Yorion. I mean, A, the reason you provided of like not a ton of blink equity here in general, and B, when Leonin Arbiter is just like one of the most important cards in your deck and you want to be able to line up like very specific synergies, diluting it with all these extra creatures just for the sake of meeting the Yorion clause seemed like a real liability.
Yeah.
So I almost wonder if like a deck like this may have a future if it goes more all in on Leonin and Boseiju and Ghost Quarter and just like be a 60 card deck that is doing white-based land destruction. You mean it.
Yeah, I will say one of the things that was different about the decks that I liked in this zone, at least the that Thalia Stompy deck that I liked, is that it was playing Chalice as well, in addition to Arbiter and Ghost Quarter, and being Boseiju plus Chalice plus Leonard Arbiter and Thalia might be a pretty heavy kind of mana disruption package that might get you a little bit farther than some of these things are. You'd need better threats to close the game, but
yeah. Here's another question I had for you, Shane, that kind of gets into something that's confused me about these decks in particular is, what do you do about a turn 1 Ragavan?
Yeah, exactly. There's no interaction here.
Like, you just have to pitch a Solitude or hope you have a Thalia on turn 2?
I mean, there's 3 Path to Exiles in the sideboard, full stop. There's no prismatic endings main. There's no weird, March of the whatnot. There's no way for you to get in the way of like a Ragavan. I mean, besides blocking it. But
Esper Sentinel's not a bad blocker for Ragavan, because if they try to kill it, then at least you get a card back.
Exactly.
But
then they are just already snowballing with the mana advantage and potential card advantage, right? So yeah, it's just like that just gets to the core of this issue, right? Which is like, your deck is not as good as other decks because you're not playing
story of my
Ragavan.
life.
You're not playing 2 mana Planeswalkers. You're not even choosing to play some of the best interaction that the game has to offer now, and something like Prismatic Ending for whatever reason. So I don't even know if this is like the kind of deck where it's like, hey, maybe we need to keep tweaking this, because like that's something that Spider Space would have done already. Do you know what I mean? Like I think it's something that, sure, if you like it and you really like the play patterns of this deck, then you're not playing the worst deck in the universe. But I don't know, how fun is it to like struggle for your 3/2s and things like that constantly, because I just think that's the kind of place that this deck is. And I don't think I'm not trying to be harsh saying that. I think that's kind of the sentiment that a true fan of the deck, and Gabe has said week after week after week, it's just not there.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's always a chance that this core will get one card and be good again, right? If you get something that is more redundant with Leon and Arbiter, somehow that could be something that would make a deck like this better. Like you said, make that disruption plan better, make it more consistent, make it more sure that you are paying good rate for your cards. Whenever I played these Taxis lists back in the day, I always was like, I hated Flicker Wisp. Like, Flicker Wisp was really powerful sometimes, but it also feels like it's just too costly these days, even though a 3/1 flyer that blinks something for less than 3 would be kind of absurd. It's always felt a little bit out of step to me too. So I understand where you're coming from too. It's always like, does this deck really need Collected Company and Aether Vial too? Like, are we just doing all the stuff that we're trying to do here, But
I guess I want to talk a little bit about Boseiju before we move on to your experiences, Dave, because like I'm curious why are people so afraid of this card when it costs 2 mana, it costs you a land. Is it because it's just so free to include? You know what's free to include? A lot of stinking cards in Modern. It's essentially free to include a Ragavan. It's essentially free to include a Prismatic Ending because it always has utility.
No. I don't think that those are
a different kind of free, I understand.
It's completely different kind of free.
Yes. It's a different kind of free. Yeah, I understand that. But it basically is like your fallback is the resource of the game, which, yes, I understand. I still don't think that it makes the spell necessarily any better than, like, you've made the comparison to something like an Assassin's Trophy, right? Like, it's Assassin's Trophy-esque. It's not as good as Assassin's Trophy, but it's easier to include in the deck. But it still does the same thing that a spell does in your deck, right? And that effect is not a broken effect. And so the real question is, like, are people annoyed because they just figured they were going to see it in every deck that could cast it? Sure, that's kind of annoying, where it sort of just takes some equity away from decks that now they have main deck ways to disrupt their plan, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that you all are pushing towards with this discussion is, okay, we played some Boseiju last week. We've seen it a couple of weeks in the format now. It was the hype card out of the set. We talked even during the spoiler about, are decks going to play it as a piece of utility, or are there going to be decks that are going to make Boseiju some kind of plan, right? And Stan, you had a deck that was kind of making Boseiju a plan. This one is trying to make it a plan. There's the Renin 6 decks that we're trying. it feels to me like none of those decks are really like gaining traction right now. And what we're really getting to is the more likely scenario during spoiler season, which is it's a really good piece of utility you get to include in your deck for free. And that is still why people should kind of be scared of it, but it's not because it's going to be abused.
Yeah. I think the strongest piece of evidence for what you're saying to the limits of Boseiju's power is that Blue-White Hammer is like maybe the new best deck. It's just like it's still like
it hasn't been knocked down at all. Yeah.
I mean that was really my feeling. Like Boseiju is powerful, but it's just not powerful to be the singular thing, with perhaps the exception of Boseiju plus Renin 6. Like you can do some damage there to maybe not lock your opponent out, but disrupt them significantly so that casting cards is harder. But that can't be all you're doing. And fortunately, those two cards in tandem is a small enough investment that you can still do powerful other stuff to hopefully have a proactive deck that isn't just relying on this one tech piece.
Yeah. And maybe the biggest place where Boseiju even matters is I get to run you get to run this in Amulet Titan to get around Blood Moon. And that's where everybody saw it was going to go originally. And maybe that's just the place where it actually makes the most sense and is the most meaningful in the format ultimately, is as a foil to Blood Moon, not as a removal spell for your creatures or your opponent's proactive plan. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, this is a heave from you, I take it?
I mean, yeah. It's just a heave, mainly because I just don't think it's doing what Modern is about anymore. But, maybe there's something there. We haven't seen the last of Boseiju by any means. So I think there's, like you said, I think it just depends on what comes down the pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, if you love casting Blood Moon, be aware of Boseiju. It's not as good as it used to be, right? That's probably the biggest takeaway from all of this. All right. Well, I have something completely different to talk about today, because one of the cards that we talked about a little bit during the spoiler episode and kind of said, we didn't think it was going to get there, is taking off in a way, I think, in Pioneer and also in... Oh, did you? I didn't remember what you said about this card. All right, so the card we're talking about is Light-Paws Emperor's Voice. Now, if you remember when we talked about it, I was worried about the fact that it had to target itself with the cards that it searched up, and wondering if that was going to be okay on a creature that didn't really have any evasion or anything. I have things to say about that. But Stan, you thought that this was going to be okay? I didn't remember that.
Here's the tape, okay?
You got the tape?
No,
you have the tape?
No, I remember it because you and I were just like, it's not as good as drawing cards, because you draw a card that's less good than the card you just played, and it has to go on a creature that doesn't get any buff besides the aura itself. And Stan was like, this seems good to me.
Yeah, that's all it takes to claim calling.
That's
calls
fair.
it.
Fair. And as you all know, I have loved auras recently. I liked it a lot in Historic. I've played around a little bit with it in Pioneer. I played it in Pioneer this week. Those decks have been good in both of those formats at different points in time. I think were knocked down a tier for sure, at least one tier before Light-Paws was printed. But spoilers, I think that they're probably both doing pretty well and will be around for a little bit because of Light-Paws at this point in time. And so let's talk about what Light-Paws does. Light-Paws Emperor's Voice is a legendary creature, Fox Advisor. It's a generic and a white for a 2/2, and it says, whenever an aura enters the battlefield under your control, if you cast it, you may search your library for an aura card with mana value less than or equal to that aura, and with a different name than each aura you control. Put that onto the battlefield attached to Light-Paws Emperor's Voice, then shuffle. Okay, so there's some things that go on with this, right? Like I've said, it's a 2/2 for 2 with no evasion. It feels like, it would be nice to get some other buff, so it's not Core Spirit Dancer, right? It doesn't search and also do some kind of Core Spirit Dancer thing, which would be absurd, of course, if that happened. I think that the hard part here is it's restricted. If you don't build the deck right, the thing that felt to me was kind of like, having to put the auras on on Light-Paws itself meant that you're likely to not get payoffs sometimes when you search something up and throw it on there. But the fact is, having to untap with a creature is kind of a thing that has to be done in these creature-y combo decks, or decks that rely on creatures to payoffs, and that's just what it is. And so you build a deck like Orzhov Auras or something like that in Pioneer, where you find a way around that. And how do you find a way around that in Auras? Well, we all know it's with Alseid of Life's Bounty and Selfless Savior and Kaya's Ghost Form and all those kind of things. And so you build a deck, and this is stuff that the Pioneer version of Auras was doing already. The Historic version, the blue-white version of Historic didn't really do that as much, but that's kind of where it's at.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we may have, and by we, I mean you two, were cold on this card at first is because we were talking about how it's maybe not as good as core Spirit Dancer, but Pioneer doesn't have Spirit Dancer.
Right.
So this is now your second SRAM in the Pioneer version of the deck.
Yeah. And let's talk about the really big thing here, too. This card searches up a card for minimal cost because you're going to play auras that cost 1 mana or sometimes 2 mana. You get to go through your deck and pick out whatever aura you want to get and put it into play immediately. So it's really better than drawing a card in that sense if you've got your deck set up the right way, because you get to put it into play. Like that's it, right? And so the fact that Light-Paws is a 2/2, it actually doesn't matter that much because it's just a body that you buff with specifically ethereal armor and all the glitters.
So it's card advantage, a tutor, and mana advantage.
Right. That's what it turns out to be.
That sounds okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what it turns out to be. And so, yeah, had that wrong. Now, does that make the deck good right now? I mean, I think that's, of course, a little bit more up in the air because I think that's meta dependent and everything. But the card itself on rate, I think, is very good. And I want to talk a little bit about what Light-Paws really does. And Stan, there's basically 2 or 3 things that I think Light-Paws really does. And the first one that you said, Stan, is that these aura decks were already reasonably good in Pioneer, and they only had one payoff for casting auras, right? They just had SRAM, and now they have 2. And so in Historic, where you already had 2, and they were kind of working on a 3rd one with that Drake from Crimson Vow. In Historic, I imagine I didn't look at Historic too closely, but now they have 12 creatures that are pretty powerful that you can do stuff with auras with. In Pioneer, having 8 turns out that it's good enough. And, just a reminder that when you have the rule of 8, when you have 8 payoff cards, you are 65% likely to have one of those 8 payoff cards in your opening hand versus 40% when you only have 4 of them. So it's a huge difference. You go from being less than 50% to almost 2/3 likely to draw it. So you're going to have your payoffs a lot more often. The other thing that it does is that the deck in Pioneer really didn't have quite the same amount of burst because it didn't have core Spirit Dancer that the deck in Historic had. So what it provides in this deck is that, sometimes you play auras like it's a fully aggro deck, and sometimes you play it like you're trying to grind a little bit and trying to like protect and go slow and kind of go forward. It didn't really have the aggro deck plan available in Pioneer in quite the same way that Historic did, but now it does with Light-Paws. Because, if SRAM only gets to be a 5/5 or 6/6 and it takes some time to win, even when it's going well, Light-Paws can get really big really fast because of ethereal armor and all that glitters. So if you go Light-Paws with some protection up, and the next turn you cast all that glitters and ethereal armor and then attack, sometimes you're suddenly attacking with an 8/8 or a 9/9, and if you dig up something even bigger or manage to cast another aura on top of that to get more cards, it kind of keeps going. Lastly, the tutoring ability gives you a chance to play toolbox cards, essentially, which I think makes the deck a lot bigger overall. They can make you go faster. They can make you find protection. They can help you with life gain. This is all the stuff that I think really helps the deck get a lot better. And it really is the different. I played a couple of different lists too. I played basically a mono white one with Thoughtseize in the sideboard and Hateful Eidolon for black. And then I played a deck that had a lot more black in it, had Kaya's Ghost Form. The first deck didn't have Kaya's Ghost Form. I think that these lists are pretty different, but I'll talk about which one I think is better right now. But to go really quickly about what these decks are, if you're not familiar, it's an 8 of. The first list that I played was a 5/0 from someone named Rastov, whose name is Guilherme Mergem, a Brazilian pro, well-known player. I think we've seen a lot of different lists from Rastov over the years. So this is like the mono white one or the base white one. It's 8 SRAMs and Light-Paws, 10 protection creatures, between Alseid of Life's Bounty, Selfless Savior, and Hateful Eidolon. Hateful Eidolon is their, and I call it sort of a protection creature because what it does is it lets you draw cards for when you're artifact or your aura's creatures die. And then sometimes there's Karametra's Blessing as a protection card as well. And then on top of that, you have your Aura's Suite, right? You have 4 Ethereal Armor and 4 All That Glitters. These are the ones that get bigger and count how many auras you have to determine what size they are. They're basically your cranial plating type effects here. Then you have 4 Cartouche's Solidarity, 4 Griff's Boon, and 3 to 4 Sentinel's Eyes. So Griff's Boon gives you flying, Cartouche's Solidarity gives you an extra body and first strike, and Sentinel's Eyes gives you vigilance and also has escape, which is awesome for getting restarted after you lose a payoff. And this deck plays out a lot more simply. You know, it's you play one of your targets, you try to get some auras going, protect it, and just attack. And it's, you know, Light-Paws has a limit to how aggro it can get, but it also has good mana. It's not too complicated. The way the deck plays can be pretty simple with this one. Light-Paws can only get up to a certain size, because there's only 5 different auras in the deck. So if you play a couple of them, when you have those names already out on the battlefield, you can't get another one. So you can run out of tutor targets actually pretty often. In this deck, you can get Light-Paws up to about a 12/12. So you need to hit with it twice.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting because you run out of those tutor targets a lot faster than I thought you were going to.
Does Alseed enable that? Where maybe Alseed, just having 1 or 2 of those out, allows you to get protection from whatever blockers they have and connect enough times to actually win.
Yeah, I mean, that is the general plan. I mean, of course, Griff's Boon is a big part of it, too, where you just give them flying and fly over it. But that doesn't work in every situation. And even having Alseid be able to give things protection proactively doesn't work great either, because sometimes you play against white decks, and then you're like, well, I can't give my creature protection from white because then all the auras will fall off of it. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of kind of, you know, Alseid's great, but there's times when it's terrible. Selfless Savior is great, but there's times when it's terrible. So you have to really think about like what protection pieces you have. And notably, you know, it can be hard to protect this deck against Skyclave Apparition if you don't have the right cards, because Savior doesn't protect against it, and Alseid doesn't protect against it either unless you want to lose all your auras. So you kind of are at a pretty disadvantage against that card and other cards like it, essentially. I thought that this deck was fine, but then I started looking around and I started talking with Craig in our Discord, who is someone who plays auras as well and has played in Historic a lot, and he mentioned that someone had shared a list with him by Mason Clark, well-known SCG circuit players Mason Clark and Nick Chirillo. I had been asking Craig about Kaya's Ghost Form. Why isn't anybody playing it at this point in time? The card was bugged on Magic Online for a long time, so I think that's part of the reason it kind of gotten out of the rotation, but it works now. And so these two people had put together a list that featured that. And so it actually runs Kaya's Ghost Form. It's a lot lighter on cards like Hateful Eidolon instead. I'm going to read Kaya's Ghost Form really quickly.
Single black enchantment aura, enchant creature or planeswalker you control. When it dies, put it into exile, then return that card. When it dies or is put into exile, return that card to the battlefield under your control.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? Is that it is an aura that you can search up with Light-Paws or just outright cast to start a Light-Paws chain that, sure, if the creature goes away, you lose the auras that were attached to it, but you get the creature back and you get to start over again. And this card had gotten some traction in the SRAM versions to just protect your kind of payoff, but it's way, way, way better in the Light-Paws versions because you can search it up from basically any position in the deck once you get Light-Paws online. Also, I think this goes really good with Lurrus in non-auras heavy games. If you get into a Lurrus grindy game, you can sometimes drop Lurrus and play Kaya's Ghost Form on it, and then they basically can't kill Lurrus, because if they kill Lurrus, then Lurrus comes back and you just replay Ghost Form on it. So they have to have 2 removal spells right away in order to get through it, and that gets really complicated, especially if you drop a Selfless Savior or something like that as well.
So yeah, you used to be able to do that with Selfless Savior, but now this also gives Lurrus protection from exile effects.
Right. And that comes up a lot, you know, especially with Skyclave Apparition being around or a few other exile events in Pioneer, which aren't, you know, the most common thing. But really, it's just the fact that you can replay this over and over again, and it's not a creature that can be killed itself, that I think helped me in a couple of matchups like that. The other thing is that it runs this deck from Mason and Nick runs a couple of really kind of spicy one-ofs that help you get out of situations like I was talking about. So one thing that happens with a deck like this is if flying is bad, what are you supposed to do, right? If flying is bad,
Swim.
Yeah, swim, exactly. Also, I often felt like I wanted haste from Light-Paws to be able to really surprise somebody with a giant creature, maybe on turn 3, maybe on turn 4, once you have some protection online. And so they threw a card in here called Messenger's Speed. Now, this card
Sounds like it gives haste.
bad. It definitely gives haste, but it also gives trample. So it's a single
Sounds
red
like a Theros
enchantment
card.
from Born. I think it's Born of the Gods, actually. But yeah, it's a Theros block card. And all it says is enchanted creature has trample and haste. It doesn't buff stats at all. But the thing that's great about it is that it gives trample when you need it. It gives haste when you can dome somebody really quickly with that. And it can also help you, that haste doesn't just have to be about being aggro. It can also help you recover from a board state where it feels like you've fallen way behind and you just want to surprise somebody with a big threat at the end of the game.
Love it.
Yeah. Also runs Rune of Sustenance, which is a 2-mana rune from Kaldheim that gives life gain. So it's searchable life gain that you can have against aggro decks. It's kind of a little bit like searching up a Shadow Spear in matchups where you feel like you're going to die to like bad life totals. Rune of Sustenance also draws a card when it comes into play, which is nice, but it is what it is. The thing that is, I think, scary about these cards, all these one-ofs that are in here, or the new auras in this one, is that none of them buff stats, right? So Kai's Ghost Form doesn't buff stats, Messenger Speed doesn't, Rune of Sustenance doesn't, and I think when you think about this, you're like, oh, I have to make Light-Paw bigger, I have to make Light-Paw bigger, and really, as long as you're getting Ethereal Armor and all the glitters out there, one of those, the card will get bigger with whatever enchantments you put on top of it. So, you're doing things like play a Ethereal Armor, go get Messenger Speed, play a blah, 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 and so it works pretty well, actually. I found this list to be a lot better to play. It has more play to it, honestly. It has more plans that you can do. It gives you an ability to proactively protect Light-Paws when you don't have a protection creature. So if someone taps out, you can drop Light-Paws and then throw Ethereal Armor on it and go get a Ghost Form so that you have that protection online without needing mana. I just felt like this was a lot better. And also, the last thing is, it's way, way, way easier to get Light-Paws to be huge in this deck because you're searching up all these one-ofs and you don't run out of target. So if you start to go off and chain with a bunch of different things, I think I had 1920 Light-Paws at one point with trample in one game that I was playing. And
that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good, especially when you have Eidolons and other things around. So I went 3-2 with the Kai's Ghost Form version. I went 2-3 with the white version. Not like the most amazing record, but I do think that the deck is fun. I think it's extremely cheap, so you're really likely to see it in Pioneer. And I think it's really good. If you happen to have lands and Thoughtseizes, it's $50 to finish the deck, maybe less, even.
I wonder how much it would cost to upgrade the Challenger deck into a Light-Paws version.
I have the Challenger deck. That's what I will be doing. I already have my Thoughtseizes and everything. I think it's like $30-$40, basically.
Dave, you know what? I've got one Light-Paws for you that I cracked open.
Nice. So I really like this deck. It was fun to play. I would probably go back for it. I don't know if it's great, but I think that you're going to see a lot of it just because it's cheap. It's less than 100 tickets on Moto too.
Probably pretty fast to play, I imagine, too.
Yeah. Although the version with Kai's Ghost Form does get a little more grindy because of Kai's Ghost Form. Luris comes up more often, all those kind of things.
Can I briefly touch on some Pioneer experiences? This is actually from last week when I played Shrapnel Blast Burn featuring Reinforced Ronin, which is a card that we talked about in the spoiler episode, which is the red 1-drop 2/2 with haste that returns to your hand at the end step. And you can also channel it for 1 and a red to draw a card, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
That's right.
So I saw this on Twitter user Felix Slew. I believe Fire Shoes retweeted this. And Shrapnel Blast is a 1 and a red instant where you can sacrifice an artifact as an additional cost to casting it, and it deals 5 damage to any target. That's a lot of damage for 2 mana. So what this deck is looking to do, make some artifact fodder while doing other burny things at the same time. So it leans a little bit on newer card Voldaren Epicure, which is the red vampire that when it ETBs, it deals 1 damage to each opponent and makes a blood token. So this does what a lot of good weird cards that you wouldn't expect being good do, is they just make another piece of cardboard. And in this deck, an important kind of cardboard, an artifact, and also doing at least 1 damage. So you've probably seen this card kind of all over the place. Like it's kind of outrageous how much impact like just a 1-drop that makes 2 pieces of cardboard can have on Magic. But it does.
Thraben Inspector, right?
Yeah, it's Thraben Inspector, and I think in a color combination that I think sometimes does more interesting things with artifacts, like red stuff a little bit more than white stuff. I could be wrong with that, but it also features a couple Bomet Courier and, of course, Reinforced Ronin, which is, in fact, an artifact as well. So what this is really doing is just trying to put some damage in on your opponent with burn spells, Monastery Swift Spear, Voldaren Epicure, Shrapnel Blast, Reinforced Ronin, stuff like that. The thing that I felt about this deck in particular is, one, it could use more artifact targets. Like, it just didn't really have enough. Like, even counting Reinforced Ronin, which like at some point is going to get stonewalled, so you can just cast it out and then blow it up with like for a 3 mana deal 5 damage. Hopefully you got some value out of Reinforced Ronin besides that in the first place. But I just felt like this deck was putting damage out slower than other decks in the format, like Affinity especially, or in Soul style Affinity strategies. I couldn't really keep creatures on the board or resolve spells versus something like Is It Phoenix, which of course had kind of its really good end game. I don't think there's a lot to this deck. I think it was just a fun thought experiment to see, hey, what can we do with Shrapnel Blast? I really wasn't sure on Reinforced Ronin. It was some pretty high highs and some pretty low lows. Like, there were some decks I played that just didn't have blockers or a lot of interaction, and I got like I was like, you're really not going to kill this Reinforced Ronin, huh? So I'll just get like 6 damage in with it. But I mean, you're basically playing like a shock with buyback, so like it's not that amazing. I mean, it's okay.
It's buyback 0, which isn't that bad either.
Yeah, so I mean, like, have any of you played with or against Reinforced Ronin yet?
I haven't got a chance.
Only in
to
limited.
Yet. Yeah,
seems bad for limited for what it's worth, unless you have a good synergy deck.
It can't block. You know what I mean? Which is a real issue. Like, it's 2 damage that goes back to your hand. So like you just can't do a lot with it. It's not that flexible. At least in Shrapnel Blast, it's like an artifact target, and it ultimately can cycle itself for 2. So it's whatever. I just wanted to talk about it because I thought it was an interesting first go around with Reinforced Ronin, not in Modern. So maybe it just needs to be in a higher powered format where there's enough other juicy targets where it's like, sure, I can maybe just get a couple dash shots in with this and it's worth a card, or I can cycle it later like a Horizon Land or something like that. So anyway, that is my my first and last thought on Shrapnel Blast, Burn, and Pioneer.
I was really excited about it, in particular with the spectacle cards. Like, you have Skewer here, but maybe Light Up the Stage as well. And the fact that you can cast it off of Chandra 3, I thought was interesting, but maybe like it just wants to be in a burn deck, so you can't really go up to a 3 mana spell.
That might also just be a standard move with it too, where I think there's a mono red deck in standard that has Ronin in it and has Chandra and some of these other cards that we've talked about that I maybe it's just not the right power level or the right shell for even Pioneer.
I mean, like the deck cut Soulscar Mage for Ronin because it probably wanted the artifact synergy and just to test it, and it's like you can't cut the thing that makes your opponent's creatures smaller. When you need it to, which is a huge upside even if you're not removing them. Shrinking them can sometimes be enough. So anyway,
yeah, I still have some faith in this card, but maybe I'd love to try the deck out myself. I think just to see how bad it is compared to what you're saying, but we'll see. I mean, like I said, maybe it's just a standard level power card, and that's kind of what it is.
What you do is you play it with Dragon Spark Reactor in limited, and then it's off to the races.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
All right, you guys want to go into some classic wind down fodder where we talk about something not Magic related?
Sounds fun.
Yeah, if we have time.
Is it steak?
I wish. Stay with us. right, you guys teed me up on this one. I don't really plan on talking a lot about different card games here on the Dive Down, but I did play a different card game this weekend in paper at my first Flesh and Blood ProQuest event this weekend. And ProQuests are essentially PTQs. You go there, you win it, and you go to the Pro Tour.
I like how Shane defined the tournament structure before explaining what Flesh and Blood is, assuming that everyone knows.
Well, I guess that's a good point.
We've all been on Twitter. We know.
So yeah, you win, you go to the Pro Tour. It's in May in New Jersey. The 100K in prizes, yada, yada, yada. So
in New Jersey?
Yeah, it's in Jersey. So the game...
And that's where the winners go? Where do they send the losers? Des Moines?
The losers go back home, head hung low. So the game isn't quite big enough to require like the pt.2 to RPT setup. Like that was like the last 4 or 5 years of the Pro Tour being a thing in Magic. And I guess Stan, you're right. I should talk about. I mean, Flesh and Blood. Yeah, it's a card game that started in late 2019 by a New Zealand company called Legend Story Studios. And all know what happened in early 2020. The world blew up and things shut down, and that really put a wrench in the workings of LSS and Flesh and Blood. And it started to, I think, really get a toehold as everyone came back to life and was starting to do more things in real life, because this game does have no digital component. It is designed as its slightly dorky and dumb name, Flesh and Blood, will tell you, it's designed to play in Flesh and Blood. And which is an advantage that I'll talk about in a minute. So ProQuests are about as big as most PPTQs I did experience, like 35 to 50 people duking it out over Swiss, top eights, the winner going to getting the invite, special gold foil promo cards, which actually do have significant value, which is nice to actually get a promo card that's worth something. But if you want to know a little bit more about Flesh and Blood, the professor's been talking about it in his YouTube a little bit. He has a pretty great learn to play video and content. Some folks in our Discord have been getting into it and learning it, which has been fun as well. And I think it's a really great game. Besides being like a collectible trading card game, it's not much like Magic. So I think there's no useful comparison between the two. They're very different games, but they're both fun collectible trading card games. And if you give me one of those, I might be interested.
And Shane, you have a history of playing like Legends of Runeterra
Sure.
and Eternal and some of these other Magic competitors.
Yeah.
I've almost gotten the sense that Flesh and Blood has captured your imagination a little bit more than those other ones.
What's good about it is it's very different and it's very new. So it is it's novel. Like it does not, Eternal is very much like Magic.
Yes.
Runeterra is less like Magic, but similar. And what I like about Flesh and Blood is that it is a very different problem to solve, and therefore is captivating in that it's something that grabs onto all sorts of stuff I like, which is collectability, which is good card design, which is 1v1 competitive card game playing. And if you know me, I just get into stuff really deeply, and I love unwrapping that new puzzle. And so it's just something that for right now, it's like, I will admit I'm slightly more interested in Flesh and Blood because it's new. But I'm sure in like a few months, it'll be like, well, I'm going to take a little break. Like after this ProQuest, I'm actually taking a little bit of a break because I was thinking a lot about it and I want to think a little bit less. And so
what's your favorite deck?
I'll tell you about it.
What's your
prowess.
deck? It's you don't explain it.
Okay.
Just what is? assume I know.
I like Chain. Chain he's basically sort of like a Vengevine. He uses the exile zone to have a second hand, and it's just as fair. It's much more fair there, but it's definitely just kind of like something I'm into, and I like using that space. Like underrate cards, but you get a second hand, so let's go. My event report is the whole point of this. Everyone I played with was awesome. The community here is really pleasant. Everyone ranges from pleasant enough to extremely nice. And that's been really great. We have a really dedicated group of people here in Colorado. They want to make it an awesome hub for the game. I think that it's succeeding. I went 4-2. I finished like 12th out of 37th. I felt like my losses were winnable, which is like fun. Like the game is always winnable within reach.
Now, on the spectrum of pleasant enough to extremely nice, where do you think you sit?
I'm definitely the pleasant enough.
He admitted
I wasn't
it.
going to say it.
Like 3 of my 4 wins were 2 life to like 0, which is saying something when the game starts at 40 life. I also won a box from a door prize, so that was pretty sweet. And so, of course, I was wearing my N95 mask the whole time. You're still in a room with a bunch of other humans. So if anyone's anxious about paper play, I get it. I'm monitoring cases. I'm boosted. I'm doing everything that I can to feel comfortable with the level of risk that I face. But all that being said, man, competing with stakes, having a competitive goal for a paper card game feels pretty great to do again. Like, I like having something to do with paper cards that I feel like, hey, if I win this, I can go do something cooler with my paper cards, along with the LGS play and stuff like that. The game has a high skill ceiling that I haven't even come close to, and I think a lower variance a little bit than Magic. And so I'm really happy that Fab is a thing that I can play in paper. I have Magic to play digitally, and I think players can definitely keep enjoying both games. This is not my leaving the podcast to be a Fab pro. This is just me saying, hey, I had a good experience playing paper trading cards, and I'm hoping that this can continue as we continue to hopefully fight back COVID and become a safer environment for all kinds of paper play, masked and eventually maskless. Man, fingers crossed.
I spent so much money on my mask, I'm never taking it off.
I mean, sometimes I like the anonymity.
And
Well, good job, Shane. I hope that you reach, if not exceed, your Fab ambitions. I'm glad we haven't lost you yet.
Stan, I know you're going to play it one of these days. I know you refuse.
I kind of do too. I do have 2 Tales of Aria Blitz decks, but I've just looked at them. And then I put them in a box.
Yeah.
That was it.
I would. It's for me. It's just like the economy of time and attention. Like,
yes, it's really
I
hard.
have to prevent myself from doing it. I don't know anything about the game that makes me not want to play. Except,
I mean, it's moderately expensive. Like everything's like modern prices, which is like not the best thing in the world.
I'd rather play the Pokemon card game because then I can like cast Pikachu's. Like an electric mouse.
I mean, that's fair.
Does Fab have any electric mice? All right, we'll figure that out We'll figure that one out after the show. For now, that wraps up this week's episode. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. And if you use Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review. You can now leave us a rating on Spotify as well, which we certainly appreciate. If you'd like to submit a question to The Dive Down, you can tweet us at The Dive Down, all one word. You can email thedivedown@gmail.com. You can also leave an audio message that might appear in a future episode at podinbox.com/thedivedown. If you'd like to support the show, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown. You can also support us while playing Magic with a Mana Traders account. If you use promo code TheDiveDown2022, all one word, get 15% off your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards via Mana Traders. And of course, you can support us and our friends over at Barrister and Man. If you need any soaps or grooming products, use promo code TheDiveDown2022 to get 15% off your first order. Barrister and Man. You're going to like the way you smell. I guarantee it. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and have some fun!